On today's show, Isaac Okoro hadn't signed an extension and he won't now. What does that mean? And we're going to start making some predictions for the upcoming Cavs season. Let's dive all the way in.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
The music you heard on the way in is from our friends at Astral Radio, and today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Chris Manning. That is Evan Dammarell. We're coming to you 5 days a week, going through everything here with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the season's about to start, so please tap in, hit subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast platform of choice if you have not already. Okay. Just a bit of news to start. We're going to talk about Isaac Okoro and also the latest on Jarrett Allen. Will he play in the season opener? We're going to do that now because we're recording our Tuesday, Wednesday episodes, back to back. So we will not have another one that we will record between now and Wednesday. But to start with Okoro, did not sign an extension with the Cavs ahead of the 6 p.m. deadline on Monday evening. Other players from his draft class did, including obviously LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, Onyeka Okongwu, Jaden McDaniels, Josh Green. Evan, I am not surprised, and talking to people about this a little bit over text, I don't think anyone's really surprised. I think if the money is where I tend to think it was, which is probably somewhere MLE-ish, maybe a little bit lower, I understand it from both sides if there wasn't a rush to either on the Cavs side to increase the offer to get Okoro to sign it, or on Okoro's case to say, I can probably just get that next year. Why should I rush into that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. More or less, like Okoro could possibly get more depending on how the season goes. Also, he could also just test the market of, restricted free agency, and then the ball's in the Cavs court if Okoro is willing to get is able to get the offer that he thinks is best for him in terms of financial security going forward. And if the Cavs want to match that, they can. If they don't, that's all the can of worms that Okoro will end up with a new team that the Cavs have to navigate at that time. But if you just look at it from a player perspective, yeah, it makes sense because the Cavs probably weren't offering the money maybe Okoro wanted. If there were, I would assume there were extension negotiations on both sides, but more than that, from a Cavs side of things, like the reason why maybe you're not giving Okoro or offering Okoro the money he wants because like things just haven't clicked or fully manifested in 3 years into his NBA career. And year 4 it's something we talked about when we did player reviews and maybe some previews, and we talked about Okoro too. Like this is his make or break season on whether or not he will stick with the Cavs long term as they continue to build towards like a hopeful title contender, or he just ends up being a trade chip for Cleveland come deadline time. And maybe that becomes part of the calculus too, because the team who negotiates with Cleveland probably wants to extend Okoro because they don't want to lose him for nothing, or maybe pay him more than they may think he's worth. But for now, yeah, they're kind of in a holding pattern. I think that's just kind of a product of just Okoro's kind of weird path to the NBA and just kind of his weird development path since coming to Cleveland.
Here's the only thing I would push back on. I think restricted free agency is now just a nightmare for guys. If he hits restricted free agency, the odds of him getting a deal that I think would satisfy him are very low. I mean, even someone like PJ Washington, who is a more versatile player, I think a more proven NBA player than Okoro has been, he went out and he couldn't get offers. He basically, I think, where this is headed for him is more, can he maximize this year and maybe he in Cleveland gets a job then, or if he gets traded during the year or next summer or something, then maybe there's a way for some of this to get figured out and he can kind of play himself into something just more stable somewhere else. I think that's clearly where this is headed. I think for him, it's okay. Can I play well enough this year for someone just to give me the money ahead of time and not hit restricted free agency? Because that is where I will end up maybe having to take the the 1-year deal and then hit UFA, and maybe that's okay, but it's a really tricky thing, I think, to look at this and say he's like, this is a really tough spot for anyone to be in. It's a tough spot for all the guys in this draft class that didn't sign extensions, but I think it's particularly challenging for him considering he has to prove it in this certain environment, or if he ends up elsewhere, then it's a whole new situation on the fly for someone like him.
Yeah, it certainly is. And also from just like a cap space situation in Cleveland's situation, obviously, like you said, restricted free agency can be a bit of a nightmare for guys. I should have, my bad for kind of understating like how much trials and tribulations come with restricted free agency.
There's nothing you need to say you're bad for. It's just like the way that market has now like shifted post, like Gordon Hayward, for instance. Remember when the Cavs like were going to sign him an RFA? Like those kind of things where you get like flown out and courted like night one, like you're not normal free agent. They're just dead, and that's for someone who was really good at that point, not someone like Okoro who is still looking for his footing in the league. Yeah,
I think that's valid, but who knows? We'll see how this goes. The Heat could end up in a PJ Washington type situation where both sides are in a holding pattern for a super duper long time, and eventually they come to the table and agree to terms of some type of contract that satisfies both parties, and maybe there's an out for Okoro to test the market sooner if things kind of manifest for him in a way that offers him a lucrative payday. But from the Cavs, at least, like you are staring down the barrel of like Darius Garland's money, Donovan Mitchell, if you somehow get him to come to the table in a possible extension. And I know like there's still another year in his contract besides that. There's Jared Allen's contract. Evan Mobley is going to be extension eligible soon too, and like there's a lot of things the Cavs could be staring down the barrel of, and if they obviously you want to avoid going into this holding pattern because it can create hurt feelings and maybe just like make things a little uncomfortable, but more than that, at least lets you kick the can down the road a little bit in terms of just finding money for Okoro based on what maybe you have left, because this is a very top heavy team salary wise already when it comes to the Cavs, and it's only going to get heavier as these young guys become extension eligible and ask for the money they rightfully deserve.
Last bit of news is Jared Allen is doing more, it sounds like, but he is not. Evan, if I had to bet today,
he's not doing more.
Okay, he's doing Jarrett things is the quote that I read.
So based on just as a fly on the wall watching Jared Allen whenever he's out on the court, it's just him working the assistant coaches, usually doing like standstill stuff. And then there was that one time he joined Damian Jones and Tristan Thompson with like layup lines with the coaches and showed a little bit of like lift off his step then. But JB Bickerstaff was asked on Monday for practice, like what was Jared able to do? And JB just nodded towards what Jarrett was doing, which was just shooting standstill shots all over the floor with assistants. So he was like a non-participant in terms of just practice stuff.
If you had to ask me today if I thought he was going to play Wednesday or if I thought he was like a lock to play this weekend in either of the home games, I would lean towards no at this point.
So would I. I think bone bruise is already tricky to begin with, just because you literally are at mercy of the bone healing and just feeling that it's also like a comfort thing. Like Bickerstaff made it clear that they want to make sure Allen feels safe out on the floor, and they want to do right by him, which is, of course, always the right thing to do. But when you look at it from the sense of this is a 7-footer that is 200 plus pounds, and he's just a massive, massive human, and he's putting so much pressure on that ankle to begin with, the healing and just recovery process is just, there's no like finite path figuring out when it happens. But yeah, would not be surprised if he's out Wednesday, and doubly like you would not be surprised if he doesn't play in either game for the home opening doubleheader for the Cavs.
I think that's pretty standard fare. I think if it gets deeper than that, then as we get into, if he misses like 2 weeks of the regular season or something, we'll see where this gets you. But I think for now, it feels very standard procedure with this Allen injury. And look, he's not the only guy around the league that's going to miss opening night. Draymond Green's not going to play on Tuesday. Devin Booker and Bradley Beal are both questionable for Phoenix on Tuesday. So
we're not getting on the court this week. I mean, it's tough for everyone out there.
Okay, but we're not making millions of dollars to play professional basketball.
That's what we want the listeners to.
Okay. All right, coming up next, we're going to dive into some season preview content. We're going to start by looking at who do the Cavs match up better with, Boston or Milwaukee? And to me, I think there's a very clear answer of who I would say. We'll talk about that coming up.
See, we may disagree, so go ahead. on to break.
All right, coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. And Gametime is the best way to buy tickets last minute for the sports, the theater, everything that you could want to watch. Right now, you can use Gametime to get Cavs tickets. I, for instance, know I've been advising people trying to get tickets for the home opener that if they want to get tickets, a great way to do it is from Gametime. Also, when you look at planning for your future, if you have a trip coming up and you're going somewhere, you could use Gametime to plan to get tickets last minute to something you want to go to. I did that this summer. I went to New York, and I plan on using Gametime to get tickets last minute to see the Liberty and the Aces play in Brooklyn. And I saved a bunch of money on my tickets for myself and my friends and my uncle by using Gametime. Right now, you can use our code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase on Gametime. So go download the app, make an account, use our code LOCKEDONNBA and get $20 off your first purchase. It's going to make buying tickets so much easier for you. You can save $20 by doing it. Evan, because I think there's a very easy answer to this question between who of Boston and Milwaukee do the Cavs match up better against. Now, I would also caveat that by saying I think this tilts my hand at least a little bit towards season prediction stuff. I think the Cavs are not on the same class as these teams. I think they have to prove it, much less I think the talent is you have some stuff to prove there as well. But when I ask you, okay, who is the team Cleveland matches up better against between Boston and Milwaukee, the two presumptive favorites in the East, who do you think it is?
I think currently it's the Boston Celtics.
I think you're crazy.
Well, the Celtics had much more depth last year compared to this year, and the Cavs went 3-1 against that team. A very much offensively different Cavs team compared to this year's team. I think Kristaps Porzingis is a great pickup for any team, but he's also not reliable health-wise, and I think that's fair to question. Just what the Celtics are cooking with. I think the Drew Holiday acquisition certainly does change things quite a bit in terms of just making one of Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell uncomfortable, with Jaylen Brown handling business against the other one. But the Celtics are lacking that strength in numbers a little bit just because they had to give up quite a bit to make these power moves to consolidate things. And I just look at it this way. Nikola Jokic is the best player in basketball currently. I think Giannis Antetokounmpo, you can make a pretty fair argument for he's the best player, but at least in my eyes, he's the second or third best player in the NBA currently, or in the world currently. Damian Lillard is a top 10 player as well. You combine those two, and just like with the pick and roll aspect and the fact that, sure, there's questions about like Adrian Griffin and his inexperience at coach, but the Bucks aren't hurting nearly as much depth-wise as the Celtics are. And I think when it comes to like key pieces, sure, Dame has injury history concerns, but like he also has a pretty solid back catalog with his time in Portland as well in terms of good health and just being lethal on the floor. But like just the on-paper combination of Giannis and Dame is pretty scary. You have Brook Lopez, who is a defensive player of the year finalist last year. Chris Middleton will be healthy again, and I think he won't be the same dude he has been maybe like 2-3 years ago when like I told everyone if you could copy and paste Chris Middleton, every team would be better. But I still think he has that potential to be a good glue guy who is able to provide you good perimeter defense and three-point shooting. And I just think the question just comes down to depth, and the Celtics are kind of lacking in that aspect. And sure, yeah, Brown and Holiday certainly will do a great job making Mitchell and Garland uncomfortable, but I am curious to see just how this all works out, just because, like, let's us not forget, Joe Mazzulla was seconds away from losing his job, and then, you know, a healthy run in the Eastern Conference playoffs kind of saved his bacon a little bit. And so I feel like the Celtics are 2 or 3 bad losses away from starting to teeter on imploding. Whereas the Bucks, they just got Giannis to recommit on an extension. They just got Dame. Like, life is pretty good over in Cream City, and they're also a team that kicked the crap out of the Cavs last season.
I think you didn't name 2 names on Boston that are the reason that I don't think it's Boston.
Oh boy,
they have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They have
I said Jaylen Brown several times.
Oh, did not hear that. You did not say Jason Tatum, who's the best player in that team.
But is he as good as Giannis or Dame combined or individually?
He's better than Dame. Okay. He's above Dame right now. He's not on Giannis level, but I think he's ahead of Dame. And what is he? He is a big freaking wing. What do the Cavs have to prove that they can guard? Big wings. Boston has two of them. Even if Evan Mobley steps into that role and defends one of those two guys, that's a challenge. And on top of that, even if Marcus Smart is now a Memphis Grizzly, I think you're looking at Derek White and Drew Holiday as like pretty annoying things to defend, on top of Tatum and Brown also being able to do that. I think Boston, with those four guys in particular, but led by the two wings, is just kind of perfectly designed to put a lot of pressure points right where the Cavs have issues. I think when you look at Boston, sure, you have to, or Milwaukee, you have to deal with Giannis, sure. But I think you have Mobley, you have Allen, you have the size to at least throw at that front court. I don't think their depth is honestly like that much better. Like you're betting on Jay Crowder and Malik Beasley and Marshawn Beauchamp. Like both of those teams are very top heavy. And Dame, for as good as he is offensively, that is someone Cleveland can hunt and attack and put in pick and roll and make work on defense in a way that they can do against no one on Boston unless Peyton Pritchard is like playing closing minutes. Dame is like as good as he is offensively. That is flat out one of the worst defensive players in the entire NBA. Cleveland has two guards who can go at him, attack him. Like Donovan Mitchell's going to could run him over in that matchup in a way he just can't with Drew Holiday.
Question.
Yeah.
So if he runs Dame over and runs into a front line of Giannis and Brook Lopez, then what?
But if he gets past Dame, there's room for a midi. It creates action where like if he gets past Dame, yes, is Giannis there? Yes, but does Giannis have to step up? Does Giannis have the help? Does that leave Max Strus open? Does that leave a big open to the dunker spot? Like that, like it's like you can, at least when you're building out the offense against Milwaukee, you can get past the first line, whether it's like Dame or Pat Connaughton or whomever or Beauchamp, and then it's like, okay, like yes, you have these two bigs that have to hold everything together, but you made them react, and then you can create things off of that. With Boston, I think the Cavs getting into their actions because of the various ways they can defend at the point of attack against Cleveland, I think it's just going to be a lot harder for the offense to work. I don't think they're beating either of these teams, but if you told me they were better equipped to deal with one, it is Boston to me, even though they had success against them last year and all that stuff, I just don't think that is a good matchup for Cleveland when it comes down to it.
I mean, I'll be frank, neither of those teams are a good matchup for the Cavs currently, just because, like you said, there is a gulf talent-wise and let's be honest, experience-wise, just because that Celtics team got their teeth kicked in by the LeBron Cavs for a while and were forced to grow up, and then really, after Kawhi and the Raptors did their thing, really seized the momentum and the void that was the Eastern Conference. And sure, Milwaukee has done the same thing, but I'm hesitant to fully lean in on Boston just from not what's on paper, but I don't know if Mazzulla is like the permanent answer at coach for them. Is he going to lose guys in the locker room? I think trading Marcus Smart, sure. It eventually led. Okay,
but you have this concern about Mazzulla. Do you have the same concern that Milwaukee has a rookie head coach?
Yeah, I do, but also the fact that you have Giannis is completely committed to the idea of Adrian Griffin, whereas Mazzulla had issues last year from get after they let Ime Udoka go. Like, there's something that stinks, and I think losing Marcus Smart in that locker room could be a bit of an issue too, because like you said, unless they're playing Peyton Pritchard a million minutes a night, and according to one Bill Simmons, he's the most complete backup point guard in basketball. But I don't know. I think neither of these teams are a good matchup. I just think Boston is, between the two, I just feel like the Cavs may have more of a puncher's chance against the Celtics, just because they do have stuff that was effective against them. Sure, the things are different now compared to last year on both sides for both teams, but maybe the Cavs can study a little bit of film, realize what Boston is and isn't doing. Maybe they aren't nearly as effective as they were defensively last year, and the Cavs can exploit some of those matchups with some of their new offensive weapons. But to your point, like Holiday and Brown, like that's a nightmare defensively. Tatum, like the Cavs don't really have an answer to that unless Evan Mobley becomes like an otherworldly perimeter defender, or Isaac Okoro is just okay with playing janitor duty that whole night for some reason. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. And I'm curious to see maybe these are matchups where we see like the limitations of what this Cavs team still has in terms of, okay, they went out and made a lot of really good offseason moves to address some of their glaring needs in terms of shooting, but how big still is the gulf between Boston and Milwaukee and Cleveland, other than like the obvious of Boston has Drew Holiday, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and the Bucks have Giannis and Dame and two really high-end role players in Lopez and Middleton on their team. So that'll be my litmus test too. But I think we're just going to disagree on this one. And I can be very happy to eat crow and say I was wrong if the Cavs just curb stomp the Bucks and get annihilated by the Celtics. But it's going to be just a feeling out process for everyone, myself included, just to for me to definitively say. But right now, I just think it's Boston is the more favorable matchup.
Yeah, end of the day, I just can't see a world where the Cavs' biggest weakness defensively is so just ready-made exploitable, and they have the point of attack stuff. That just feels like a real baked-in challenge that is going to be if they overcome it, it'll prove something. But I think from where they're starting with the two smaller guards, all that stuff, I think it's a challenge. All right, coming up next, we're going to do another season preview topic. This one, our biggest question about the 2023-24 Cavs. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel right now is giving you a great offer. You get $200 in bonus bets from America's #1 sportsbook, guaranteed when you place one $5 bet. That is $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. You've been thinking about joining FanDuel. There's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Right now, visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season, and NBA stuff is there as well. They have futures. They're going to have your daily game betting if you want to get involved in that. Over-under win totals if that's something you're interested in. So remember, that's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Get $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, when you place one $5 bet. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and the official sportsbook of Locked On. Evan, what's your big question that you're thinking about as you look ahead to the 2023-24 season, which kicks off for Cleveland Wednesday in Brooklyn?
It's more or less kind of what I was alluding to in the last segment was, what can the Cavs show us that shows they belong maybe in that conversation of the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference? Because last season, heading into the playoffs, we previewed the Knicks series ad nauseum. We know what happens at this point. And the Cavs got punked. We saw a lot of their biggest weaknesses get exploited on the biggest stage. They looked overwhelmed. They were definitely exploited for their youth and every other thing in between, just because it was just not a fun run for the Cavs, clearly. And now looking ahead to this, yeah, it's easy to distance yourself from it. I wonder how much do the Cavs distance themselves from it, just because come playoff time again, will we feel more comfortable and say, okay, this Cavs team has grown up off the court? They aren't just completely buying into regular season success. They're mindful of what happened last year and realize that regular season success only takes you so far, especially come playoff time. But more than that, what can this Cavs team do to show that they can hold a candle to the Bostons and the Milwaukees of the world, to show that, hey, they're not going to get punked in the first round again? Maybe they do somehow, some way make an Eastern Conference Finals, or if they luck into it, an NBA Finals run. I think the Eastern Conference Finals is their ceiling this year, mind you. But that's my question, is how can they prove to myself and maybe others, maybe you as well, do they belong in that conversation, or are they still kind of in this growing up process and maybe figuring out where they belong in the East?
I think that's about where I'm at as well. I think this year is, for a team that had a great net rating, won games, they lost in the playoffs. This is something of a prove year. To me, this is the question. Can they level up in a way that it feels like they need to? Evan, I don't think there's a way around this, and this isn't really a way to talk about the Mitchell stuff, but I know the Cavs are young. I know there's long-term optimism because you have Garland and Mobley, but I do think there's pressure right now to accomplish something, whether that's for Mitchell, whether that's to build out this coaching staff and have them continue to be the ones in charge, whether it's needing to make other roster changes. I think this season needs to be a proof of concept to some degree. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happens when you make the Mitchell move. And I think that's what happens when you go out the way you did last year. It feels somewhat wrong for me to say, because in some ways I'm like, I get the fan thing where you say we have Garland and Mobley, like that's the plan, that's the future, but like nothing is guaranteed. I think you have to maximize every year at a certain point, you know?
Sorry, I was thinking of the LeBron quote of nothing is given, nothing is guaranteed, whatever. But
like you can't assume in 2 years you're going to be like fine, even if Donovan Mitchell walks. You kind of just got to maximize this year. You got to go for stuff.
Oh, you can't be complicit in the fact that you have a foundation of Darius Garland and Evan Mobley because, folks, Evan Mobley hasn't signed an extension yet. He could very well say, you know what, this situation ain't for me. I want to go to Los Angeles and be back in my hometown, like with the Clippers or something like that. Completely off the wall hypothetical. Like probably never going to happen, but like you never know. That's just how basketball is. It's such a volatile thing. To your point, like you are now trying to prove to Donovan Mitchell that this is a player, one, that you gave up a ton of assets for picks wise to get, convincing him to commit the better part of his prime and his long-term future with the Cleveland versus pursuing greener pastures, whether it's like the Miami Heat or the New York Knicks or something like that. There's a lot of questions, and I think this Cavs team can't be complicit or complacent rather on what worked for them last year, maybe what the regular season success is. Like this is a bit of a growing up period, just because let's say they flame out in the first round of the playoffs again, there could be wholesale change at the top. Like Kobe Altman could go, JV Bickerstaff would likely be the guy who gets the axe if the Cavs flamed out in the first round again, and there could be a completely different conversation about this team because then Donovan Mitchell could be like, all right, 2 years in a row, first round blowouts, like get me out of here. And like the Cavs then have to trade Donovan Mitchell for, there's the sunk cost fallacy and like you get pennies on the dollar, whatever. But like, do you ride that out, or do you have a guy that is in the last year of his deal and then we'll just leave in free agency and you try to run it back and maybe convince him one last time? Like you can't be complacent. Like you have to be dynamic if anyone else is being static and take advantage of that and just go full throttle into the season. And you and I talked about this a lot, like whether it's the regular season tournament or the in-season tournament, or just like record-wise. Like if you're Cleveland and you want to make a legitimate run to or through the playoffs, it's obviously avoiding Boston and Milwaukee as much as possible. And probably the cleanest path to do that is getting the best record in the Eastern Conference, being the 1 seed, and then hopefully Boston and Milwaukee, they're the 2 or 3 seed at that point. And you can avoid them as long as possible. And then you can just say, like, yeah, we made a run to the Eastern Conference Finals, or we fought it out in the second round of the playoffs in 6 or 7 games. And that is at least a success compared to last year. And you at least feel better about how things look long-term going forward at that point versus just a very small, measly 5-game sample size from last postseason.
Yeah, I think this year is going to be an important year, no matter how you spin it, no matter where this ends up. And there's like basically a whole calendar year before we know. The end of this season is going to have a lot to say about where the Cavs go in the future. It's a really, really important year for the team, and I don't think there's any way around that. All right, we'll be back tomorrow. More season preview content for you in that episode, including where do the Cavs finish in the East, our best case, worst case, and we're going to make some title and finals picks, and as well as where the Cavs will ultimately finish next season in the playoffs. Talk to you guys then. Thanks again to Jake Stevens, as always.